Not sure what to put into your side deck for this upcoming month? Don't worry, we've got you covered. What's up YouTube, Dal here from Zephyr Games, and today I'm going to give you a rundown of all of the side deck cards that become massively useful for you in this upcoming format or this upcoming month in general. We're going to take a look at all of the main meta decks considering these particular side deck options, and we're also going to consider the brand new branded structure deck as well, including what you may get in there that can help you and what you might be needing in order to face them. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. Now let's dive headfirst into the breakdown of all the hand traps that can help save you during this format. So, as I've laid out here, I've got monsters, spells, and traps. Now, obviously, some of these are going to dictate, depending on the type of deck you're playing, whether you're going to be maining some of these cards or siding some of these cards in. I've kind of taken in the perspective that you should be maining Call by the Grave or just not playing it at all. And then you should really be maining at least a couple of copies of Ash Blossom, possibly Imperm and Veiler as well. So I haven't considered these as side deck options because they're just that kind of level of a card that if you are going to be playing in that particular way, you are going to be maining them already. So what I'll do with each stack of these cards is I'll go through their uses, what they're going to come up against, and where they can be utilised the most. So we'll start off with the favourite hand trap that keeps falling in and out of metas and in and out of formats, and that is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Well, why is this so good? Well, it's actually very, very good against the Brave matchup. Now, it is so good because the continuous spell Fateful Adventure not only lets them search out their continuous play of Draco back, the quick play of Draco back, but it also then gets them the Griffin. So straight away, by activating Ghost Ogre on Fateful Avenger, it can really, really slow down that engine, and straight away it stops them getting to their Omni Negate unless they've already opened it, which is just very bad luck. On the top of that as well, Ghost Ogre is also very, very good at dealing with specific field spells that activate once they are already face up on the field. So you look at stuff like Flundereeze with the map as well, Ghost Ogre can put in some work there. I've also mentioned in the past many times that a lot of people are prepared for an Ash Blossom, an Imperm or Veiler, but a Ghost Ogre that actually makes them lose the material they've put on the board can actually hurt them a lot more, especially in a format where you just need 2 materials to make Verte and go into the power play fusion of something like DPE or Dragoon. So that is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. The next card we've got coming up is Prankertops. Now this one is more specific if you are a go second deck or if you feel that you're going to be going second. Mainly if you are going to be go second, you're probably going to have this in the main deck, but it's just one of these cards that not only is it a 2600 beater, it's got a free form of interruption and it's quick play. It actually puts your opponent under a lot of pressure just by having this one boy on the board. The biggest issue is that it is a one-off, so it is very, very specific and very, very lucky to be getting into it or drawing it unless you are specifically playing dinos. So that is the faults for it. Its overall effectiveness against the decks, when you look at stuff like Brave, Phantom Knights, Punks, Branded, Sword Souls, Brave as an engine, Dragon Link, Virtual World, Cyverse Lich, Flunders, and many more. It pretty much does the exact same thing. Being a 2600 beater is very important, and then the quick effect is also going to put in a lot of work. The next one we are going into on monsters is Dimension Shifter. Now again, this is very specific depending on the deck that you are playing, and then of course the decks that you are facing. Dimension Shifter is completely terrible against a deck like Flundereeze, or is basically terrible against a deck that would main it itself. So you probably never want to put it in. The other downside of this is you have to be the first card you play. When you look at stuff like Ghost Reaper and no material, the reason that we are not looking into cards like that is because again it is very, very specific. And what I mean by that is you need to A, open it pretty much first turn, B, be going second with it, and then C, have the card in the extra deck that is going to trigger or get rid of. So unless there are going to be a 97% meta where you're going to be facing mirror matches, it's not that great. Whereas with D-Shifter, it's one of these ones that if your deck can play under it, but your opponents can't, it pretty much gives you a near auto win. You just have to see it in your opening hand before you've played pretty much any card at all. Unless, of course, you are Flunders, but it is what it is. Moving on to the next card, of course, we do have DD Crow. Now, DD Crow is another hand trap that I feel kind of comes in and out of metas and in and out of formats depending on what is being utilised, what is being used, and pretty much how effective it can be. Now, unlike stuff like Ghost Bell and unlike stuff like Skullmeister, this one can actually hit cards before they activate, which can be very, very important. There is obviously a give and take with this kind of formation in the sense that it's very, very good against stuff like if you kind of put your heads back to DD Crow versus Ben 10, especially with the new rules, getting rid of that Ben 10 before it can actually have the ability to resolve is very, very good. Against the Eldritch matchup, getting rid of their Golden Lord can cause them a couple of issues. Hitting their trap cards, as long as it's not the turn after they've been sent there, because they'll just chain them anyway. You can also look into stuff on the base deck. You can hit the War Enchantress before they activate it from grave, if they particularly try to send it there. You can hit stuff like Fog Blades. The only issue is that it's only going to be during a trade 1-for-1, and when you're trading a 1-for-1 from the graveyard, they've pretty much already got something on the board, so they already have contingencies in plan to make do with what they need. It can be a very good option if you are limited in other stuff that you have access to, but it's just a card to consider. Keep in the back of the mind as well that it can put in a little bit of work should you need it to later on down the line. Then my personal hand trap of the format is, of course, Token Collector. Now, the reason this is going to be so good going forward and is still very, very, very relevant right now, there you go, tongue-tied, is incredibly good against the base deck because you look at Auroradon, it is spawning tokens, and Token Collector says no. It is great against the Brave Engine, it is also great against Sword Souls, which is why I feel that Sword Soul has kind of taken a little bit of a step back, because a lot of people are already playing Token Collector for the Braves. It's just a knock-on effect for Sword Soul and vice versa. If they're already playing it for Sword Soul, it's then going to have a knock-on effect on the Brave. So it's a bit of give and take. The only difference with the Brave Engine is if you're dropping a Token Collector against a Brave player, they're probably only using the Brave Engine as exactly that, an engine, so the rest of their deck will then kick in to give them ways to play around it. You can, of course, play around Token Collector in Sword Soul, but it does become a lot harder because you then need to have the ability of Vishuda Bounce, or you then need to have the ability of negating it outright. But by the time you've already put a monster on the board and then a token, unless you're playing Chalice, you're gonna struggle a little bit. So that's Token Collector. I think it's a great option. The fact that it can also summon itself from hand or grave is very, very important. So when you look at a Brave deck or a base deck, they're actually sending Token Collector through Riser Dragon as well, and this sets them up a near enough auto win, especially if they can protect it against stuff like Sword Souls in the matchup as well. Carrying on, probably my second favourite hand trap of the format is, of course, Artifact Lancer. Now, the reason this one is so good is, again, against Flunderees, it pretty much makes them stop their turn because they lose a lot of chain block abilities. It's also very, very good to be shotgunned very early in the standby phase. The only risk you play is if your opponent is playing Gamma. But the reason that this is so good is because you drop it in the standby phase, it shuts down 50% of the consistency of the Brave Engine because they then cannot use the Water Enchantress. So they're then relying on opening up the right of Armoresia in order to continue that Brave play. It can also be very, very painful against Sword Soul because you pretty much shut down all of their Tenyi plays. They can't Ashuna, they can't Adhara, and they definitely can't Vishuda. So it's very good if they are going, if you're going first and they're trying to then bounce your stuff. It can also be very good against the rogue matchups when you look at stuff like Invoked as well. If they activate Invocation, you chain Lancia. It then puts them in a position of they need to have an Alistar in the hand, which sometimes they do, but more times than not they probably won't, and they're trying to banish it from the graveyard, which is very, very important. Lancia is just overall a very good card, and it then kind of counteracts and helps you out, especially in, again, more of the rogue matchups when you look at stuff like Tri-Brigade. It's probably a card that you may or may not be playing if you're playing at a higher level competitive event. You look at stuff like Phantom Knights, it's probably better off playing the next card that I'm about to show you rather than Lancia, and that is Droll and Lockbird. Now, what I mean by that is Droll and Lockbird can be very, very good against a lot of decks. When you look at the Brave section of it as well, if you drop Droll and Lockbird after they declare to add the equip spell, or if they activate Water Enchantress to add the Right of Armoresia, you drop Droll against them, they are then forced to equip the equip spell, which means they lose a free discard, and then they are no longer able to get into the Griffin Rider as well. So you've already cut off access to their plays. It can also very, very hurt the base deck as well, because if they're playing with Sword Soul Engine, Tenyi Engine and everything else like that, there are ways of trying to search it. It's not going to be the greatest of drops, but it can really, really slow them down. And if they are playing based as well, you shut off the base, you shut off the rest of the engine, or the rest of the deck in theory as well. Not to mention when you look at Prank Kids as well, if you drop draw against them, they lose a Roxy's, and then they also use a Pranks in the end phase as well. So straight away you're stopping those two cards and a Doodle Doodle Doo. So it's very good against that particular matchup as well. It is not a standout board breaker game ender, unlike Token Collector, because again, when you look at Prank Kids as well, it stops them using the Pranks token. It also stops them using the Brave Engine to protect. So we all know that a very if you combo off something that stops the Brave package and then have an Ash Blossom at the right time that they cannot chain block from, it pretty much ends the Prank Kids turns, and they're not exactly ending their boards on the strongest capabilities around. Carrying on as well, another great hand trap is Nibiru. Now obviously Nibiru is incredibly powerful if your opponent switches off. There are a lot of decks that are actually maining Nibiru right now because it is more effective being mained as less people are expecting it than it is being sided. 9 out of 10, if you know you're a combo deck and you're going to lose to Nibiru, you know that they're going to be siding it in at least in game 2 and possibly game 3, so you attempt to play around it a little bit more. Not to mention as well, a lot of the high competitive decks are being able to drop a Baron before they get into Nibiru territory and kind of play around it that way as well, which is why it kind of feels that it's fallen a little bit out of favour in the upcurrent meta or the current game states, but it does give you another very, very powerful hand trap to kind of keep your mind on and keep your eyes open for, as it will cause a lot of damage for anyone that falls asleep at the wheel and doesn't really kind of consider what they are doing as they are comboing off, and Nibiru will pretty much wipe them out. Of course, it's going to be very good if they can play through it, but if you drop it at the right time just before they put that Omni Negate on board, you will break it apart. Moving into the next one, of course, we do have Cypher and Gear Gamma. Now, the only downside to this is the fact that it is a 4-card engine, and once it is used, unless they are silly enough to let you put the driver in the graveyard by destroying it via card effect or destroying it by battle, you're only going to be able to use it once, which means 2 copies of Gamma are pretty much going to be dead unless you're playing Halley Firebrax to try and turbo it out that way. Gamma is probably one of the best hand traps because it does exactly what Ghost Ogre does, and then it does exactly what Ash Blossom does as well. So it's basically a negate and a destroy. So you're pretty much getting these 2 very good powerful cards together. So the second they use a monster effect, especially as a counter side to something like a Lancia shotgunned early or a Water Enchantress early, anything like that, even an Ash Blossom to stop one of your draw spells, Gamma can be incredibly powerful and very, very useful. The final 3 cards I'm going to show you pretty much consist of a Kaiju, a Lava Golem, and of course the Winged Dragon of Ra. Now, these are less relevant as of right now because of the fact that the Kaiju is specifically you need to then play multiple Kaijus unless you are a dedicated Go second deck in order to see it early enough and then prevent effectiveness on breaking your opponent's board. Not to mention that more times than not, your opponent is going to be playing more than one interruptive, a powerful card. So you look at stuff like Baron DPE or Cheezing, Cheezao, plus a Baron or something along those lines. So you're then going to be moving more towards Lava Golem and maybe Ra Sphere mode. Now when you look at both these cards right here, these 2 will catch your opponent out more than a Kaiju. The only issue is it requires more setup and it takes away your normal summon. Unlike Rite of Armoricia, which lets you have your normal summon, you just can't use its effects, this one actually says you cannot normal summon. These count as your normal summon. Now, this one's a little bit more tricky to deal with for the pure fact that they need to be putting 3 monsters on the board. Now, yes, most times than not, if opponent goes full off without being interrupted, they will put 3 monsters on the board. Chances are the average player is going to be ending on possibly 1 to 2. So Lava Golem is going to be your better option because you can ultimately just go, you know what, I'll get rid of those 2 monsters, and the last monster you've got is going to be something that isn't going to interrupt me during my turn. It's also very, very difficult as well because it is a 3k monster that unless you're getting very close to time and you give them Lava Golem and they burn for that 1000 during the draw phase, I believe it is, or the standby phase, then you're not really going to be able to get the maximum advantage for it. You will then need to get rid of it, which is what some people struggle with as well when they Nibiru and don't actually figure about the consequences of trying to get rid of it thereafter. So this is the monster lineup for all of your options. Like I said, the Kaijus, the Lava Golems, and the, Nibiru is probably more stuff for going second. Everything else can be played for going first or second, of course, except Prankatops. You kind of want those as generic and dedicated hand traps. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the spells. So we'll start off with, of course, the cheapest and easiestly accessible one, and that is being Forbidden Chalice. Now, I actually rate Forbidden Chalice a little bit better than Infinite Impermanence at this current moment in time for this particular format, for the pure fact that it gives you that ability, as soon as your opponent knows, okay, they've put a monster on the board, I'm not going to fear Imperm, well, Chalice is still a very, very maximum threat. Now, Chalice is kind of the cheaper budget alternative to Forbidden Droplet, and is also the quicker option in compared to Dark Ruler no more, for the pure fact that Dark Ruler will not allow you to chain to something, so Scythelock, while it is still around, is still a very powerful, viable, pretty much game-ending play, and that's where you need something like Chalice, so that if your opponent holds back until you put a card on the board so you can't use an Imperm, they are still open to Chalice. Droplets, of course, does have that amazing clause where it basically says your opponent cannot respond to this card's activation with any other card you send. So if you send a spell, monster, and trap, they are pretty much not responding at all. Dark Ruler No More basically says your opponent cannot respond with monster effects, so should they be able to chain a trap card or anything else, they'll be able to play around it and then target and negate the Dark Ruler No More. Keeping in mind as well that Dark Ruler No More means your opponent does not take damage for the rest of the turn. Forbidden Chalice actually boosts one of your opponent's monsters by 400, whereas Droplets halves everything. So you can kind of understand why this is at the height that it currently is, and it is screaming out for another reprint. We have just had this confirmed that it will be in the Megatins 2022, but we are also hoping that this may make an appearance in Ghosts from the Past 2 as well. Like they did with previous cards, they have reprinted them twice in 1 year, but this needs to be easily accessible so that everyone can get their hands on it, as it is the ideal combination between these two board-breaking cards. Speaking of board breaking, when you're looking into the future and you're looking into the possible high inclusion of the branded deck, what better than a Super Poly? Not only can Super Poly be used to break boards, but it can also be used to build your own board. The reason Super Poly is so good is that it does have a multitude of targets, and your opponent cannot respond to it outright. They can't judgment it, they can't negate it with a Dragoon, they will lose whatever board presence they have created. Now, the only downside is it does dictate some parts of your extra deck, and it is also then specific to up to the particular matchups that you are going to face. I feel that this will see a spike in play during the release week of the branded structure deck, or Albaz Strike to be specific, because I feel a lot of people will be testing that out and playing around with it. Not only does that give you Albaz targets to fuse into, but it also gives you the generic good old-fashioned Drakus de Pelio alongside Mud Dragon and of course Starving Venom, which we all know has multiple effects that when it leaves the field it can also nuke all of your opponent's special summon monsters as well. So there's a lot to kind of consider with that. I still feel Super Poly is a great card going first and second, as it is a quick play, but it does come down to deck specifics. So keep in mind, if you have space in your extra deck and you can utilize those spaces with the fusion plays, it is definitely worth getting. It is 100% worth picking up prior to whether you are playing or feel that you are going to be facing a lot of the branded structure deck, because they do pump out a lot of fusion monsters, and most of them will be lights and or darks. Less so a board breaker, but more a board stunner. We have gone with Mystic Mine. Now, I really like this as a way to basically counteract a break my board deck. Now, what I mean by that is you can activate this, and if you open up multiples, you can activate it. Your opponent will need to negate it, and then you basically trade in at a 1-for-1. If you then activate a second Mystic Mine, it allows you to control the game under a Scythelock kind of format. Yes, with the Brave Engine, they can get to Draco back to target it and bounce it back to the hand, which if they do get to that route, or if they do have that play, it will ultimately lead them to victory. But that is one reason that the Mystic Mine play as a side deck option is being seen less and less. However, keep in mind as well that if they do not have the ability to out this, it will give you time to regain your resources, play under the Scythe extra deck lock, and then be able to kind of pick the board apart. It's only going to be good should you be able to either win the game with putting less monsters on the board than your opponent, but also be able to remove it should you need to when the time comes. Another very good thing about this as well is it does technically protect you from all types of hand traps. So should you really want to, and you go Dark Ruler, Mystic Mine, you're then able to start activating Branded Fusion, Shaddoll Fusion, anything like that without worrying about your opponent activating an Ash Blossom, a Veiler, anything along those lines. Continuing on, one option we do also have for side decks is Crossout Designator. Now, quite like Super Poly, but in a bit more of a bigger extent, this is only going to be useful in decks when the format basically says, okay, everyone is going to be playing this particular card 99.999% of the time, or your deck has so much space for hand traps that you want to make sure you don't lose to specific hand traps, so you activate Crossout Designator, or you can main the Crossout Designator. Keep in mind, it doesn't need to declare a monster specifically, so you do not need to worry just about hand traps, but Crossout Designator can be great as a side deck option should you auto lose to something like a Mystic Mine, to something like a Dark Ruler no more, and to something like a Forbidden Droplet should your opponent not send a spell. It is very specific, which is why it is not seen in as many side decks, but it's one of those cards, if you do not have some of the other options, you can play this instead. Then we're going to look at front row and back row destruction. So we're going to go with a Cosmic Cyclone, a Harpy's Feather Duster, and of course a Lightning Storm. Now, Lightning Storm gives you the best of both worlds as a Raigeki and a Harpy's Feather Duster, but you need to control no face-up cards in order to activate it. Duster deals with the entire back row, but is hard to get to as it is a specific one-off, and it is also not a quick play effect. So if you are worrying about the Scythe Lock, if you are worrying about anything else along that back row that may cause you issues, or something else that your opponent might be activating before you're able to get to your main phase and declare to use Harpy's Duster, Cyclone would be the better option. Yes, a lot of people do consider Twin Twisters as well, but the way I see it is Twin Twisters will be better in a deck that can actually benefit from discarding a card and dealing with two cards. The Cosmic Cyclone is in here specifically because you are targeting one particular card that you know of its location, and by banishing it with Cosmic Cyclone, it causes a lot of issues. It also gives you that ability that you need to be able to wait for your opponent to activate a card, and then you can chain the Cosmic Cyclone to it. Whereas if you were to activate Harpy's Duster, for example, they could in theory chain the DPE in order to pop one of their back rows should they want to play it around a different route. The final card that we will talk about as well is a triple Tactic Talents. Now, this is also a very good card, but you do need to keep in mind that the higher level players are actually activating monster effects during the standby phase and not during the main phase, so the triple tactics will actually fizzle and not be able to be used that turn. It's also one of these win more cards, and what we mean by that is you're basically playing something out already with a specific strategy that you want to go for, and it is interrupted. So you then need to think of what you are trying to draw, what you are trying to take, or what you're trying to remove from your opponent's hand off of the activation of this effect. It's going to be good going first if your opponent is playing a heavy amount of hand traps, because then you can remove a card from your opponent's hand that may stop them going combo. But again, you are then opening yourself up to the unknown, because if they open up multiple options for something like that, or if they open up multiple ways of getting to combo from the top deck, they are still able to play and you're not really stopping them there. The draw 2 can be great, but again, you've got to consider that the draw 2 would need to lead you into stuff that will special summon, as most of the powerful hand trap monsters will be used when you have conducted your normal summon. And that is it for the spell lineup. Moving on to the traps, very straightforward and simple on this one. We'll talk about quickly Tikaboo and Rivalry alongside with Gozen as well. So these are again specific to the type of deck that you are playing and specific to the type of deck that your opponent may be playing. So again, Rivalry locks them into a specific type, Gozen locks them into a specific attribute, and Tikaboo locks them into only being able to allow to have one of each type. So they all serve different purposes. The reason they are so good is unlike something like Summon Limit, which needs to be played first turn to then build a board up, this can actually allow you to break boards as well. And what we mean by that is if your opponent burns out all of their negates and then you flip a Rivalry or a Gozen or a Tikaboo, they are then forced to rip their own board apart and put them down to only one particular type monster or something along those lines. It is very specific depending on what you want. It is a better option for going first and second, which is why it is more balanced, in my opinion, than something like Summon Limit. Speaking about going second, evenly matched, this is one of the first cards that I always put in my side deck. Yes, it will require your opponent or you to bait out an opponent's monster effect, 9 times out of 10 what you're doing is you're trading a battle phase and an evenly matched to out an Omni Negate. But if they don't have protection from this, you will pretty much be able to clear their entire board from one card and then build your board up off the back of it. You then look at stuff like Judgment and Strike. Judgment is a little bit better than Strike because you are exactly doing that, which is trading 1 for 1. You stop their normal summon, you stop their branded fusion, you stop it outright. They are not then able to do anything, whereas Strike relies on a monster effect specifically, so they've already built something up or they're already trying to regain or build up their resources. Judgment is an out-and-out great card, specifically if you are a go first deck and you're playing a lot of trap cards and you are worried about a card like Evenly Matched. Keep in mind as well though that 9 out of 10 when you activate this fearing an Evenly Matched, they've probably opened up multiples. And then the final card that I think is great because it is also in the branded structure deck is Dimensional Barrier. Now the issue with this is it is only good going first. If you open up multiples, then of course it would be great for future plays. But what this does is it pretty much shuts your opponent out of a particular summoning mechanic for the entirety of that turn. Now that is of course going to be very, very good if we go into a format where we are only relying on Omni types. The issue is when you look at Brave, they utilise both Synchros and Links. Yes, their Links aren't as strong as their Synchros, so being able to hit them for the Synchros can really, really slow them down, but they still have plays to make after the fact. It is also true as well that if you're playing a deck that runs the Fusion Destiny package, then you will still have to face a DPE. However, when you do look at branded fusion and the fact that it locks you into fusions for the entire turn, whether you have activated it at the end of the turn or the start of the turn, unless it goes through Verte, and if it goes through Verte, they are limiting their plays anyway to a Mirror Jade Dragon. Being able to activate Dimensional Barrier pretty much ends the branded turn. They are then passed with an empty field, and you are able to go power play to finish it from there. And that is pretty much it. I know it is a very long video, but I wanted to break these down in order to give you as much in-depth information on all of the side deck cards that I feel you could be putting together if they are not already in your main deck and conduct your 15 card side deck. Now, the majority of my side deck actually consists of Drum and Lock Bird, Lancia, Token Collector, Evenly Matched, Lightning Storm, Cosmic Cyclone, cards like that. They are all dictated depending on the event you go to, so there is no, this is the best 15 cards side deck or extra deck you can ever have in your entire life, because it will change depending on the venue. Anyway, I hope you have found this video helpful and informative, and I hope it has given you a breakdown going forward of the type of cards you could be looking at to put together in your side deck and how to kind of present them going forward. If you do have any questions or would like to see examples of side deck options, then by all means let me know in the comments down below, and I'll be more than happy to bring them for you. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.